There are moments in life that divide time into before and after. This is a story about one such moment when a broken wagon wheel on a dusty Kansas road brought together two souls who had both given up on hoping for anything more. I share this tale because I believe in the quiet heroism of ordinary people, not the kind that makes headlines, but the kind that happens when someone stops to help a stranger, expecting nothing in return. It's a story for those of us who remember when a handshake meant something, when your word was your bond, and when kindness didn't need a reason. If you've ever felt forgotten by the world or wondered if good people still exist, this story is for you. It reminds us that sometimes the smallest act of mercy can change everything. The wagon wheel had been threatening to give out for the better part of 3 miles. Caleb Brooks heard it first, that grinding, clicking complaint that wood makes when it's about to surrender. He pulled the reins and brought the covered wagon to a stop, dust swirling around the horse's legs like brown fog. The late afternoon sun sat low on the Kansas horizon, painting everything the color of old copper. He climbed down, his knees protesting the way they always did these days, and walked around to the right rear wheel. The spoke had cracked clean through, not just cracked split along the grain like someone had taken an axe to it. Well, he muttered to himself, pushing his hat back on his forehead. That's that. 43 years of ranching, and he still couldn't fix a wagon wheel worth a damn. His wife Eleanor had always teased him about it. Caleb Brooks, she'd say, you can birth a breech calf in a thunderstorm, but you can't hammer a nail straight to save your life. Cha-sa say. 6 years gone now. Eleanor. 6 years of eating alone at that long kitchen table, of talking to horses because they were the only ones around to listen. The money from the Dodge City cattle sale sat heavy in his coat pocket, $340 in cash. Too much to be carrying on open roads, but the bank in Harper wouldn't be open until Monday, and a man couldn't leave that kind of money sitting in a hotel room. He stood there, hands on his hips, staring at the wheel like it might fix itself if he glared hard enough. Nothing but prairie in every direction. The nearest town was Twin Forks, still a good 12 miles east. He'd passed a farmhouse maybe 5 miles back, but his pride wouldn't let him turn around and ask for help. Not Caleb Brooks, not the man who'd built the biggest cattle operation in Harper County from nothing but 40 acres and stubbornness. Pride, what a useless thing it was sometimes. He was still standing there, useless, when he heard the other wagon approaching from the west. It was a dark wagon, closed up tight with canvas curtains the color of faded indigo, not the kind of wagon you saw families traveling in, too small for homesteaders, too plain for merchants. The driver was a thick-necked man with a face like boiled leather, and he pulled his team to a stop about 20 yards back. Trouble, the driver called out, though his tone suggested he didn't much care one way or the other. Busted spoke, Caleb said. I'll manage. The driver shrugged and clicked at his horses to move on, but as the dark wagon rolled past, the curtain on the side window shifted, and Caleb caught a glimpse of a face looking out. A young woman, pale, dark hair pulled back, eyes that looked at him for just a moment before the curtain fell closed again. Something about those eyes made him stop breathing. Not because she was beautiful, though maybe she was. He couldn't tell from that brief glance. It was something else, something in the way she looked at him, like she was memorizing his face, like she was saying goodbye to something she'd never even had. The wagon rolled on. Caleb watched it go, that strange feeling still sitting heavy in his chest. Then the wagon stopped, maybe 30 yards ahead. It just stopped. Caleb could see the driver arguing with someone inside. He could hear the muffled voices, but not the words. Then the door on the side opened, and the young woman stepped out. She was wearing a calico dress, blue faded to gray, and her feet were in boots that had seen better days. She wasn't carrying anything except her own 2 hands, but she walked toward him with a purpose that made him straighten up. Your wheel, she said. Her voice was lower than he'd expected, rougher, like she didn't use it much. Ma'am? She didn't repeat herself. She just walked past him, around to the broken wheel, and crouched down to look at it. Her hands went straight to the crack, fingers tracing the split wood like she was reading something written there. You got a hammer, she asked, not looking up. I got tools in the box there, but She was already moving, walking to the toolbox, mounted on the side of the wagon, and opening it. She pulled out his hammer, some nails, and a block of hardwood he kept for propping things. Then she reached into a fold of her dress and pulled out a small hammer of her own, a little thing with a handle made of dark wood, worn smooth from years of use. "You carry your own hammer?" he asked, before he could stop himself. She didn't answer. She just got to work. Caleb stood there like a fool, watching her. She moved fast and sure, the way someone moves when they've done a thing 100 times before. She positioned the wood block behind the cracked spoke, then started tapping, not hard, but precise. Tap, tap, tap. Each strike in exactly the right place. "Hold this," she said. And he found himself kneeling beside her, holding the block steady while she worked. Her hands were small, but the knuckles were scarred. The nails were cut short. Practical. These weren't the hands of a lady who'd spent her life in parlors. These were hands that had worked, that had fixed things. "You learned this somewhere," he said. "Nowhere special." "That ain't what I asked." She paused, hammer raised, looked at him for the first time since she'd started working. Her eyes were brown. He saw now. Dark brown, like good soil. "I learned from doing," she said. "From breaking down on roads worse than this one and not having anyone to help." She went back to work. 5 more minutes, and the spoke was holding. Not pretty, not permanent, but it would get him to Twin Forks. She stood up, brushed her hands on her dress, and tucked her little hammer back into whatever pocket she'd pulled it from. "That'll hold," she said. "Get it fixed proper when you get to town." Caleb reached for his wallet. "Let me pay you for—" "No. One word. Flat. Final. Ma'am, you just saved me half a day's walking. At least let me—" I said no. She was already turning away, heading back toward the dark wagon. Caleb took a step after her. "At least tell me your name." She stopped, didn't turn around. "Hope," she said. "It don't mean anything." And then she was walking again, and the driver of the dark wagon was holding the door open for her with an impatient scowl, and Caleb watched her climb back inside without looking back. The wagon rolled away, east, toward Twin Forks. Caleb stood in the road, the Kansas wind picking up around him, and he couldn't have said why his chest felt so tight. He bent down to gather his tools, and that's when he saw it. Her hammer. She'd left it lying in the dirt beside his wheel, the little hammer with the dark wood handle, worn smooth from years of use. He picked it up, felt the weight of it, and turned it over in his hands. On the handle, carved deep into the wood, were 2 letters, J.H. Not her initials, someone else's, someone who had owned this hammer before her, someone who had carved their name into it the way a craftsman marks his tools, someone she had lost. Caleb looked up at the departing wagon, already growing smaller in the distance. The sun was lower now, the light turning from copper to something darker, and carried on the wind. He heard the driver's voice, talking to someone who had ridden up alongside. "Twin Forks. Night, got a few for the backroom dealing." The words hit him like a bucket of cold water. Backroom dealing. He knew what that meant out here. Everyone did, even if nobody talked about it in polite company. The kind of business that happened in small towns where the law looked the other way. Debt contracts, forced labor agreements. Young women signed over like livestock because they owed money they could never repay. It wasn't legal. Nothing that happened in those back rooms was legal. But Twin Forks was 3 days' ride from any real lawman, and money bought silence. He looked down at the hammer in his hand, at those 2 carved letters, at the memory of her eyes, the way she'd looked at him like she was already gone. The covered wagon creaked as the horses shifted, impatient. Caleb Brooks had spent 6 years keeping to himself. 6 years minding his own business, tending his cattle, eating his meals alone. 6 years telling himself that the world's troubles weren't his concern, but he was still standing in that road, holding a dead man's hammer, watching the dark wagon disappear toward Twin Forks, and he couldn't make his feet turn toward home. That old hammer reminded me of something my grandfather used to say: a tool remembers every hand that's held it. I wonder, have you ever found something left behind by a stranger that changed your path? If this story speaks to you, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from today. We'd love to hear from folks across this beautiful country. The dark wagon was gone. Caleb stood in the settling dust, turning the small hammer over in his hands. The wood was warm from her grip or from the Kansas sun. He couldn't tell which. His thumb traced the carved letters. J, H. The grooves were deep, made by someone who intended them to last. A father's hammer. Had to be. No one else carves their initials into a working tool except a man who wants his children to remember him. She'd left it behind. A woman who carried her own hammer in her dress pocket didn't forget something like this, which meant she'd been distracted, which meant something had rattled her enough to leave behind the only thing she owned worth keeping. His horses snorted, stamping at flies. The wheel would hold. She'd said so, and her hands had known what they were doing. He could climb back up, turn west, and be home before full dark. There was hay to put up, fences that needed mending along the south pasture, 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running, that kept a man too busy to think about eating supper alone again. He should go home. Caleb looked east. The road stretched out flat and empty, the wagon already swallowed by distance and the failing light. Twin Forks was 12 miles that direction. He'd been there once, maybe twice, for cattle business. Small town, one main street, a hotel, a general store, and a saloon called the Silver Dollar that stayed open later than it should. The kind of place where certain business happened in back rooms. The kind of business decent folks pretended didn't exist. Backroom dealing. His jaw tightened. None of his concern. That's what any sensible man would say. She was a stranger. He didn't know her. Didn't owe her anything. If anything, she owed him, she'd refused his money. After all, they were square, less than square. He climbed up onto the wagon seat, gathered the reins in his hands. The leather was cracked and familiar. How many times had he sat right here, on the same seat, making the same choice, the safe road home? Or something else Eleanor would have known what to do. Eleanor always knew. But Eleanor was 6 years in the ground, and Caleb was alone with a stranger's hammer and a sick feeling settling deep in his gut. He turned the horses east. The sun had long set by the time the lights of Twin Forks appeared on the horizon, glowing faint and yellow against the black prairie sky. Twin Forks smelled like horse manure and coal smoke. Caleb tied his team to a post outside the livery stable, his fingers fumbling with the knot in the darkness. The main street was quiet this time of evening, a few figures moving between buildings, lamplight spilling from windows, the distant plunk of a piano playing something off-key. The Silver Dollar sat at the end of the street, 2 stories of unpainted wood with a porch that sagged in the middle. Light blazed from every window. Caleb could hear voices inside, the low rumble of men talking, an occasional burst of laughter. He didn't go in. Not yet. Instead, he walked around the side of the building, keeping to the shadows. His boots crunched on broken glass. Someone had thrown a bottle against the wall and never cleaned it up. The air was cooler here, away from the street, and it carried the smell of something cooking beans and salt pork, the cheap food of cheap establishments. A door at the back, closed. A lamp burning in a window above it, curtains drawn. Caleb pressed himself against the wall and waited, listened. Voices. Women's voices, soft and indistinct. And then another voice, older, sharper, giving orders. Dressed and ready by 9. I don't care if she won't eat. She'll stand up there and do as she's told, or she'll wish she had. The back door opened. Caleb held his breath. A woman stepped out, heavy-set, gray hair pulled back tight, wearing a dress that might have been fine 10 years ago. She carried a chamber pot in one hand, and she walked to the edge of the alley and emptied it into the weeds without ceremony. Mrs. Harrow. Had to be. The woman the driver had taken his orders from. She stood there for a moment, looking up at the stars, then muttered something under her breath and went back inside. The door closed. The lock clicked. Caleb let out his breath. 9 o'clock. He pulled out his pocket watch, tilting it toward the light from the window above. 7:30. Less than 2 hours. He circled back to the street. to the front of the silver dollar and pushed through the swinging doors. The heat hit him first, then the noise, the piano louder now, the voices overlapping, the clink of glasses. The place was half full, maybe 20 men scattered at tables and along the bar, working men, mostly, dusty clothes, calloused hands, a few better-dressed types near the back, playing cards. Caleb walked to the bar. The man behind it was wide as a barrel, with a face that had seen its share of fists. "Whiskey," Caleb said. The bartender poured without looking at him, slid the glass across the wood. Caleb took a sip. It burned going down, cheap and harsh. He set the glass on the bar and kept his voice low. "I hear there's some business tonight. Back room." The bartender's eyes flicked up, measured him. "You buying or just asking? Depends on what's for sale." A slow smile spread across the bartender's face. "Debt contracts? Work agreements. The kind of thing that ain't exactly posted on the church door, if you catch my meaning." He leaned closer. "Business starts at 9. $50 gets you in. Cash only." Caleb's hand tightened around his glass. "Who runs it?" "Lady named Harrow. She brings the merchandise, handles the paperwork. Been doing business here for years." The bartender squinted at him. "Good arrangements. If you need workers, young, healthy, owe more than they can pay." The whiskey turned sour in Caleb's stomach. He set the glass down. "And if someone wanted to settle a debt outright before the bidding," the bartender laughed. "You'd have to talk to Mrs. Harrow about that, but she don't usually sell direct. Bidding brings better prices." He squinted at Caleb again. "You got money, old-timer." "I got money." "Then you'll want to talk to her. Room at the top of the stairs. But I wouldn't bother her until 9. She don't like being interrupted when she's getting her girls ready." Caleb nodded, dropped a coin on the bar for the whiskey, walked away. He found a table in the corner where he could watch both the stairs and the front door. The clock on the wall said 7:45, an hour and 15 minutes. He pulled out the small hammer and set it on the table in front of him. The worn handle gleamed dull in the lamplight. Somewhere above his head, behind a locked door, she was waiting, and Caleb still had no idea what he was going to do. The clock hands crawled. Caleb sat in his corner, nursing a second whiskey he didn't want, watching men drift in and out of the silver dollar. The piano player had given up and gone home. The card game in the back had gotten louder, someone accusing someone else of dealing from the bottom. 8:30. The room was filling up now. Different men than before, cleaner shirts, better boots. They came in 2s and 3s, nodding to each other like they shared a secret. Some went straight to the bar. Others found seats near the back, where a set of double doors led to another room. Caleb watched a man in a gray suit count out bills at the bar. The bartender took them, wrote something in a ledger, and handed over a numbered card. The man in the gray suit tucked it into his pocket and walked toward the back. $50 for a seat. The bartender hadn't been lying. Caleb's hand went to his coat, feeling the weight of the money against his chest. He had enough, more than enough. The cattle sale in Dodge City had been good, $340, minus the $50 for a seat. That left $290. $290 to settle a debt he didn't even know the size of. His stomach turned at the thought. Settle. Like she was a ledger entry, like she was a horse or a heifer to be traded and signed over. But that's what they were doing upstairs, wasn't it? That's what Mrs. Harrow and her numbered cards and her backroom business were all about. Putting a price on human beings and calling it contract work. A burst of laughter from the bar. 2 men were telling jokes, slapping each other on the back. One of them was young, maybe 25, with the soft hands of someone who'd never worked a day in his life. The other was older, heavier, with a gold watch chain hanging across his vest. "I hear there's a new one tonight," the young one said, loud enough for Caleb to hear. "Young, knows how to work. Mrs. Harrow picked her up somewhere out west." "They always say that." The older man waved his hand. "Last time I got one that was supposed to know how to cook, and she burned everything she touched. This one's different. Driver said she fixed a wagon wheel on the road today, with her own tools." Caleb's breath stopped. The older man laughed. A woman who can fix a wagon wheel. Now I've heard everything. I'm telling you what I heard. Harrow's starting the bidding at 100 for her. Says she's worth it. $100. That was her price. $100 for a woman who carried her father's hammer in her pocket and stopped to help strangers on empty roads. Caleb stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, and a few heads turned his way. He ignored them, walked to the bar, put both hands flat on the wood. I want to talk to Mrs. Harrow. The bartender looked up from his ledger. I told you. She don't see anyone before. Tell her someone wants to settle a debt direct, before the bidding. Caleb pulled out his wallet, counted out $50 and laid it on the bar. Tell her I'll pay double whatever she's expecting. The bartender's eyes went to the money, stayed there. Double. You heard me. A long pause. The bartender looked at the money, then at Caleb, then at the stairs leading to the second floor. Wait here. He disappeared through a door behind the bar. Caleb stood alone, his heart pounding against his ribs. The men at the card table were watching him now. So was the young man with soft hands. Let them watch. The door opened. The bartender came back, followed by Mrs. Harrow. She was smaller than she'd looked in the alley, older, to the lines around her mouth deep and hard. She wore the same faded dress, and her gray hair was still pulled back tight, but she'd added a string of fake pearls around her neck, a sad attempt at looking respectable. Her eyes swept over Caleb like she was appraising cattle. You want to settle direct, she said. Not a question. One of your girls, the one who fixed the wagon wheel today? Mrs. Harrow's eyebrows rose. You know her. We met on the road. And now you want her contract. A thin smile. Most men at least wait to see the merchandise before they start bidding. Caleb's jaw tightened. I ain't most men. How much does she owe? Mrs. Harrow studied him. Her eyes were flat, calculating the eyes of someone who had learned long ago to see people as numbers in a ledger. She cost me 150, sir, she said. I was expecting to make at least that much again tonight, so if you want her direct. She paused. 300, cash, 300, almost everything he had. Caleb reached for his wallet. But there's a problem, Mrs. Harrow said, and her smile widened. I don't sell direct. I bid. That's how this works. You want her. You bid like everyone else. I'll pay 350. You could pay 1,000. The answer is the same. Shares. She leaned closer, and he could smell the lavender water she used to cover the smell of sweat. The bidding is how I keep my reputation. Men come from 3 counties because they know my sales are fair. Everyone gets a chance. If I start selling direct, word gets out, and my business falls apart. Caleb's hands clenched at his sides. So you'll sit in that room, Mrs. Harrow continued, and you'll raise your hand like everyone else. And if you're the highest bidder, she's yours. Fair and square. She turned to go, then paused. Bidding starts in 20 minutes. I suggest you get a good seat. She walked away, her fake pearls clicking softly against each other. Caleb stood at the bar, $290 in his wallet, and realized it might not be enough. Caleb paid his $50 and took a numbered card. The back room was smaller than he'd expected, maybe 30 feet square, with wooden chairs arranged in rows, facing a low platform at the front. A single kerosene lamp hung from the ceiling, casting uneven shadows across the walls. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of nervous sweat. He found a seat in the back row, where he could watch the door. 20 men, maybe more, filled the chairs around him. The young one with soft hands sat near the front. The older man with the gold watch chain was beside him. Others Caleb didn't recognize: farmers, merchants, a man in a preacher's collar who kept his eyes fixed on the floor. The clock on the wall said 5 minutes to 9. Caleb's hand went to his pocket, feeling the outline of the small hammer through the fabric. $290 left. If the bidding started at 100 and climbed past 290, he was done. He'd have to sit there and watch someone else walk out with her contract. The thought made his throat tight. A side door opened. Mrs. Harrow walked out, carrying a wooden gavel and a leather ledger. She'd changed into a darker dress, almost black, with a high collar that made her look like a schoolmarm. She stepped onto the platform and faced the room. "Gentlemen," she said, and the murmuring stopped. "Welcome to Twin Forks. You know the rules. Cash only. All contracts final. What happens after you leave this room is your business, not mine." She opened the ledger. "First contract tonight. Mary Ellen, 18 years old, good health, basic housework skills, owes $75. Starting bid is $75. The side door opened again and a girl walked out. Blonde hair, thin shoulders, eyes that looked at nothing. She climbed onto the platform and stood there, hands clasped in front of her. Hands went up. Voices called out numbers. Caleb watched the girl's face, watched it stay empty, like she'd gone somewhere else in her mind. The bidding climbed to 120, 130, stopped at 145. "Sold," Mrs. Harrow said, "to the gentleman in the brown coat." The girl was led away. Another took her place, then another. Caleb sat rigid in his chair, watching the parade of faces, young faces, tired faces, faces that had stopped hoping for anything. 3 contracts sold. 4, 5. The room grew warmer. The smoke grew thicker. Caleb's shirt stuck to his back. Then the side door opened one more time. Hope walked out. She was wearing the same calico dress. The blue one faded to gray. Her hair was loose now, hanging past her shoulders, and someone had tried to put color on her cheeks. Rouge that stood out harsh against her pale skin. She climbed onto the platform and stood with her back straight, her chin up. Her eyes moved across the room, searching. They found Caleb in the back row. She didn't react. Didn't smile. Didn't frown. Just looked at him for a long moment, and something passed between them that he couldn't name. "Last contract of the evening," Mrs. Harrow announced. "Goes by Hope, age unknown, but young, strong, useful around the house and barn wagon repair, horse handling, general labor." She paused. "Let that sink in. Debt owed is $100. Starting bid is 100. The young man with soft hands raised his card. 100. 110, called the man with the gold watch chain. 120. 130. Caleb's mouth went dry. He raised his hand. 150. Heads turned. Mrs. Harrow looked at him with something that might have been amusement. 150, from the gentleman in the back. "Do I hear 160? 160, the young man said, twisting in his seat to look at Caleb. 170, 180, the numbers climbed. Caleb's wallet pressed against his chest, $290. That was his ceiling. That was everything he had left in the world. 200, someone called. 210, 220. Caleb raised his hand. 250. A murmur went through the room. The young man with soft hands conferred with his companion, the one with the gold watch chain. They whispered back and forth, glancing at Caleb, at Hope, at Mrs. Harrow. 250 going once, Mrs. Harrow said. Going twice. 300. The young man's voice was sharp, triumphant. Caleb's stomach dropped. 300. He had 290. $10 short. Mrs. Harrow's eyes found him in the back row. That thin smile again. 300 from Mr. Whitfield. Do I hear 310? Caleb's hand wouldn't move. His throat was closed. On the platform, Hope's face had gone still, not empty like the other girls, but still, waiting. 300 going once. The hammer was in his pocket. Her father's hammer, J.H. Going twice. He stood up. I'll pay 350, he said, but not to take her contract. The room went silent. Every head turned. Mrs. Harrow's gavel hung in the air. Explain yourself, she said. The silence stretched tight as wire. Caleb walked forward, down the narrow aisle between the chairs. His boots sounded loud against the wooden floor. He could feel every eye in the room tracking him, the farmers, the merchants, the young man with soft hands whose face had gone red with anger. He stopped at the front of the room, below the platform where Hope stood, this close. He could see the rouge smeared unevenly on her cheeks, the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands were clenched at her sides. I said, explain yourself, Mrs. Harrow repeated. Her voice had gone cold. Caleb turned to face her. I don't want her contract. I want to pay off her debt. Whatever she owes you, however she came to owe it, I'll pay it. Plus your profit, $350, cash. And she walks out of here free. No contract. No obligations to anyone. Mrs. Harrow's jaw worked. Caleb could see her calculating the money he was offering, the anger on Whitfield's face, the murmuring crowd behind them. This is ridiculous, young Whitfield said, rising from his seat. You can't change the rules in the middle of a bidding. I bid 300, fair and square. Her contract is mine. It ain't yours yet, Caleb said, not taking his eyes off Mrs. Harrow. The gavel hasn't fallen. Mrs. Harrow's fingers tightened around the gavel handle. She was a businesswoman. That's what the bartender had said, and businesswomen understood numbers. 350, she said slowly, for a contract I could sell for 300 at bidding. That's $50 profit I didn't have to work for. That's right. And you don't want to hold her debt. You want to clear it entirely. Yes. Why? The question hung in the smoky air. Caleb felt every eye in the room on him, the men in their chairs, Mrs. Harrow on the platform, Hope standing rigid beside her. Why? Because a stranger stopped to help him when she had nothing to gain. Because she carried her dead father's hammer in her pocket. Because she'd looked at him on that dusty road like she was already saying goodbye to the world. But he couldn't say any of that. Not here, not to these people. Does it matter, he asked. Money's money. Mrs. Harrow studied him. Her eyes were flat, unreadable, the eyes of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. This is outrageous, Whitfield said again, stepping into the aisle. His face was the color of raw beef. I came here to bid on a contract, not to watch some old fool make a spectacle. Mrs. Harrow, I insist. You insist on nothing, Mr. Whitfield. Mrs. Harrow's voice cut through the room. This is my business. My rules. She turned back to Caleb. You understand what you're doing. You pay this money. She walks out with nothing owed, no contract, no obligation. She could disappear tomorrow, and you'd have nothing to show for it. I understand. And you still want to do this. I do. Another long pause. Mrs. Harrow looked at the money Caleb was pulling from his wallet, looked at Hope, looked at the room full of men who had come expecting a different kind of evening. Then she held out her hand. Give it here. Caleb counted out the bills. $340, everything he had, except a few coins. He placed them in her palm. She counted them quickly, her lips moving, then nodded and tucked them into a pocket of her dark dress. The debt is paid, she announced to the room. The girl owes nothing. She's free to go. Bidding concluded. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Whitfield sputtered something, his face purple, but Mrs. Harrow was already turning away, walking toward the side door. The other men rose from their chairs, confused, muttering to each other. Some looked at Caleb with curiosity, others with something closer to contempt. He didn't care about any of them. Hope was still standing on the platform. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. The rouge on her cheeks looked garish under the lamplight, and her hands were still clenched at her sides. Caleb walked to the edge of the platform and looked up at her. It's done, he said quietly. You're free. You don't owe anyone anything. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the catch, looking for the trick, looking for whatever it was that men always wanted when they gave something away. Free, she repeated, and the word came out strange, like she was tasting something she didn't recognize. Free, no strings, no obligations. You walk out that door. You go wherever you want. I won't follow. I won't ask for anything. Her hands unclenched, slowly, one finger at a time. I don't understand, she said. Why would you? The side door banged open. Mrs. Harrow was gone, but the bartender stood in the doorway, his bulk filling the frame. Behind him, Caleb could see the main room of the saloon and two men he didn't recognize, wearing badges on their chests. That's him, the bartender said, pointing at Caleb. The one who disrupted the bidding. Mr. Whitfield wants to file a complaint. The men with badges pushed past him into the room. "Mr. Brooks," one of them said, "you need to come with us." The jail cell smelled like urine and old straw. Caleb sat on a wooden bench that had been worn smooth by decades of men, waiting for bail, for trial, for release, or for worse. The single window was too high to see out of, and the bars threw long shadows across the floor in the lamplight from the hallway. A complaint. That's what the deputy had said. Mr. Whitfield had filed a complaint alleging that Caleb had interfered with a lawful business transaction, disruption of commerce, possibly fraud. It was nonsense. Caleb knew it was nonsense. Mrs. Harrow had taken the money willingly. The transaction was complete. But this was Twin Forks, and Whitfield's family owned half the businesses on Main Street, and the sheriff was a man who understood which side his bread was buttered on. So here he sat, in a cell that stank of other men's desperation, with nothing in his pockets but a few coins and a small hammer that didn't belong to him. They'd let him keep the hammer. The deputy had looked at it, shrugged, and handed it back. "Ain't a weapon," he'd said. "Just a tool. Just a tool." Caleb turned it over in his hands, feeling the worn wood, the carved initials, J, H, whoever that was. He was long dead now. And his daughter, if that's who Hope was, she was out there somewhere in the dark, free but alone, with nothing but the clothes on her back. He'd done what he set out to do. He'd paid her debt. She was free. So why did he feel like he'd failed? The cell door at the end of the hallway clanged open. Footsteps approached two sets, one heavy, one light. Caleb stood up, his knees protesting. Straw clung to his trousers, to the back of his coat. He brushed at it uselessly. A man his age, sitting in jail like a common drunk. Eleanor would have had words for him. The sheriff appeared first, a thick man with a gray mustache and eyes that had seen too much and stopped caring. Behind him came someone Caleb didn't expect. Hope. She was still wearing the calico dress, but she'd scrubbed the rouge off her face. Her skin was raw where she'd rubbed too hard, pink patches on both cheeks. She'd pulled her hair back now, tied it with a strip of cloth torn from her hem. She walked past the sheriff like he wasn't there and stopped in front of Caleb's cell. "You're a fool," she said. Caleb blinked. "Pardon? You heard me. A fool. You had $340. You spent it all on a stranger you met on the road, and now you're sitting in jail with nothing. And Whitfield's out there telling everyone you're a cheat and a fraud." "I ain't. I know you ain't." She cut him off. "But that don't matter here. Whitfield's got money. Money talks in this town. You've got nothing left but a broken wagon and a hammer that belongs to me." Caleb looked down at the hammer in his hand, then back at her. "How did you get in here?" "I talked to the sheriff." Her voice was flat. "Told him I'd testify that Mrs. Harrow took the money willingly, that the debt was settled legal, that Whitfield's just a sore loser who didn't get what he wanted. And he listened to that. He listened when I told him I'd also testify about where his deputies were last Tuesday night, when they were supposed to be on patrol." A thin smile crossed her face. "The walls in Mrs. Harrow's rooms are thin. I heard plenty while I was locked up there, the deputies bragging to each other. Mrs. Harrow counting money with the sheriff's name on her lips." The sheriff cleared his throat from behind her. "Ma'am, I said I'd consider. You said you'd let him go." Hope's voice went hard as iron. "That was the deal. I keep quiet about Tuesday. You open that cell. So open it." The sheriff's face reddened. His hand went to his belt, to the keys hanging there. For a long moment he stood frozen, pride and practicality warring behind his eyes. Then he unlocked the cell door. Caleb stepped out. His legs felt unsteady, like he'd been sitting longer than he had. Straw still clung to his back, his shoulders. He could smell himself sweat and jail stink and something like shame. The sheriff wouldn't look at him, wouldn't look at either of them, just muttered something about staying out of trouble and walked away, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Hope stood in the hallway, arms crossed, watching Caleb like he was a problem she hadn't figured out how to solve yet. "Why did you do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Come here. Get me out. You could have just walked away. You're free. You don't owe me anything." She stared at him. The lamplight caught her eyes, made them look almost gold. "You're right," she said. "I don't owe you anything. You made that clear back in the bidding room." She paused. "But I don't like debts, real or imagined. So now we're even." Even? Even? She turned and started walking toward the door at the end of the hall. "Your wagon's at the livery stable. Wheels still holding. You should get it fixed proper before you head home." Caleb followed her out into the night air. The street was empty now. The saloons closed, the windows dark. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. He could still smell the jail on his clothes, could still feel the straw sticking to his back. "What about you?" he asked. "Where will you go?" Hope stopped walking. Her back was to him, her shoulders tight. "I don't know," she said. "I've never been free before. Never had to decide where to go or what to do. I've been moving for so long, being moved for so long." She stopped, swallowed hard. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out the hammer. "You left this," he said, "on the road, when you fixed my wheel." She turned, looked at the hammer in his hand. Something shifted in her face, something raw and unguarded that she quickly pushed back down. "Keep it," she said. "It ain't mine. It ain't mine either. Not anymore." She took a breath that shook in her chest. "It was my father's. He died when I was 12. That hammer is all I had left of him, and I carried it for 8 years like it meant something, like holding on to it would bring him back." She looked at Caleb, and her eyes were wet. "But he ain't coming back, and carrying that hammer didn't stop me from ending up on that platform, so maybe it's time to let it go." Caleb held the hammer out. "Take it." I said, "I know what you said. Take it anyway." He stepped closer. "Your father gave you this. He carved his initials into it so you'd remember him. That ain't nothing. That ain't something you throw away because life got hard." Hope's hand trembled as she reached out. Her fingers closed around the handle, and she held it there, suspended between them. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I don't know where to go. I don't know how to be free." The dog barked again, closer now. Somewhere a door slammed. Caleb made a decision. "I have a ranch," he said, 40 miles east of here. "I need help, real help, not charity, someone who can fix things, someone who knows how to work." Hope looked at him. "I'll pay fair wages," he continued. "You'd have your own room, your own space. You come and go as you please. No obligations except honest work for honest pay." "Why?" The question was barely a breath. "Because you stopped to help a stranger on an empty road," Caleb said. "And I reckon anyone who does that deserves a chance." Hope stood in the dark street, holding her father's hammer, tears cutting tracks through the raw pink patches on her cheeks. And Caleb waited for her answer. Hope didn't answer. She stood in the dark street with her father's hammer pressed against her chest, and she didn't say yes, and she didn't say no. She just stood there, breathing, like the question was too heavy to lift. Caleb waited. The night air was cooling fast, and he could feel the sweat drying on the back of his neck. Somewhere down the street, a lamp flickered out in a window. The town was going to sleep around them. "I need to think," Hope said finally. Her voice was hoarse. I don't know how to decide things. Not like this. Not when someone's standing there waiting for an answer." "Fair enough. There's a boarding house at the end of the street. Mrs. Patterson's place. She rents rooms by the night." Hope wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I'll stay there tonight. Think it over. And in the morning I'll know." She looked at him, and something in her expression shifted, became harder, more guarded. "But don't wait for me. If I decide to come, I'll find my way. If I don't—" She shrugged. "Then you'll have your answer." Caleb nodded slowly. "The ranch is called Brooks Creek. Anyone in Harper County can point you to it. Brooks Creek." She repeated the name like she was testing it, seeing how it felt in her mouth. "All right." She turned and walked away. Her boots made soft sounds on the packed dirt, and Caleb watched her go until the darkness swallowed her up. Then he stood alone in the empty street, with nothing in his pockets but a few coins and nothing to show for the night except a broken wagon wheel and a choice he couldn't take back. He walked to the livery stable. The nightman was asleep in the corner, snoring into his chest, and Caleb had to shake him twice before he woke up enough to point at the stall where the horses were. The wagon was there too, pushed against the back wall, the repaired wheel still holding just like Hope had promised. Caleb paid the boarding fee his last coins and made sure the horses had water and hay before finding his own corner of the stable. He lay down on a pile of clean straw, his hat pulled over his face, and tried to sleep. Sleep didn't come. He lay there in the dark, listening to the horses breathe, thinking about paper and pen and a woman who'd never had to make a choice before. The first gray light of dawn was creeping through the stable door when he heard footsteps. He sat up, pushed his hat back, blinked the grit from his eyes. Hope stood in the doorway. She was wearing the same dress, but she'd washed her face properly now. No more rouge, no more raw pink patches from scrubbing too hard. Her hair was braided, pulled back tight, and in her hand she held a folded piece of paper. "I wrote down the reasons," she said. "The reasons to go with you, and the reasons to walk away." Caleb got to his feet. Straw stuck to his clothes, his back, his hair shone. He brushed at it uselessly, feeling like an old fool who'd slept in a barn. And Hope looked at the paper in her hand. Then she looked at him. "The reasons to walk away were longer," she said. "Safer, smarter. I don't know you. I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know what you really want, no matter what you say." Caleb's chest tightened. But there was one reason to go. Hope continued. "Just one. And I couldn't argue with it." "What reason?" She held out the paper. Caleb took it, unfolded it, and read the single line written at the bottom of the page, under all the crossed-out words and half-finished sentences. "He stopped to help me too." He looked up. Hope was watching him, her face unreadable. "My father used to say that you can tell everything about a person by what they do when no one's watching," she said. "When I stopped to fix your wheel, I didn't know anyone was watching. And when you came to that bidding room, you didn't know I'd ever find out what you did or why." She took a breath. "So I'll come with you, to Brooks Creek. I'll work for fair wages, like you said. And if it don't work out, you leave whenever you want. No questions asked." No questions asked. They stood there in the stable doorway, the morning light growing stronger around them. Caleb folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. "Wagon's ready," he said. "We can leave whenever you are." Hope nodded. Then she walked past him, climbed up onto the wagon seat, and sat there with her father's hammer resting in her lap, waiting for the road to take her somewhere new. The wagon rolled east into the rising sun. Caleb kept the horses at a steady walk, easy on the repaired wheel. The road stretched out ahead of them, 2 dirt tracks cutting through the tall grass, and the morning air smelled like dew and sage and the faint promise of heat to come. Hope sat beside him on the bench, her hands folded in her lap around the small hammer. She hadn't spoken since they left Twin Forks. And Caleb didn't push. Some silences needed to be left alone. They passed a farmhouse with smoke rising from the chimney. A woman in the yard looked up from hanging laundry, watched them go by, then went back to her work. A dog ran alongside the wagon for a quarter mile before losing interest and turning back. The sun climbed higher, the shadows shortened. Caleb's stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since yesterday, but there was nothing to be done about that now. "How long have you lived out here?" Hope asked. Her voice startled him. He'd gotten used to the quiet. "Born here," Caleb said. "My father homesteaded the land back in 42. I took it over when he passed, built it up from there. And your wife, Eleanor." The name still caught in his throat, even after 6 years. "She came out from Missouri in 61. I married her 3 months after we met." 3 months. "I knew the first time I saw her. Didn't see any point in waiting." Hope was quiet for a moment. Then, what was she like? Caleb thought about it. How to describe Eleanor to someone who'd never met her, the way she laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny, the way she could calm a spooked horse with just her voice, the way she'd sit on the porch in the evenings, reading aloud by lamplight. She was practical, he said finally. Didn't put up with nonsense, but she had a way of seeing the good in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. She sounds kind. She was... Caleb adjusted the reins. She would have liked you, I reckon. Hope turned to look at him. You don't know me. I know enough. The road curved around a low hill, and suddenly the land opened up before them, miles of grassland rolling toward the horizon, broken here and there by stands of cottonwood trees along the creek beds. In the distance, Caleb could see the roof of his barn, the outline of the house, the windmill turning slowly in the afternoon breeze. Home. That's it, he said. Brooks Creek. Hope leaned forward, squinting against the sun. Her hands had tightened around the hammer. It's big, she said. Big enough? Caleb guided the horses onto the smaller track that led to the ranch. Main house has 4 rooms. There's a bunkhouse for the hands, but only 2 of them right now, Miguel and his son, Tomas. They handle most of the cattle work. You'd have the room at the back of the house. It's small, but it's got a window and a door that locks. A door that locks. From the inside. Key's yours to keep. So. They rode in silence for another mile. The house grew larger as they approached whitewashed walls, green shutters, a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Eleanor had planted roses along the front, and they'd gone wild in the years since she'd been gone, sprawling over the railing in a tangle of thorns and faded blooms. There would be talk. Of course. A young woman living at a widower's ranch. Caleb could already hear the whispers at church, the sideways glances at the general store, but he'd stopped caring what people said a long time ago. He pulled the wagon up beside the porch and set the brake. The horses snorted, glad to be stopping. Well, Shin, he said. Here we are. Hope didn't move. She sat on the bench, looking at the house, at the roses, at the windmill creaking in the wind. Her knuckles were white around the hammer handle. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. I don't know how to live in a place, how to stay. I've been moving for so long. She stopped, swallowed. Caleb climbed down from the wagon, walked around to her side, held out his hand. One day at a time, he said. That's all any of us can do. Hope looked at his hand, weathered, calloused, scarred from 40 years of ranch work, the hand of a stranger who had spent everything he had to set her free. She took it. Her palm was rough against his, small but strong. He helped her down from the wagon, and she stood beside him in the afternoon light, looking up at the house. I should warn you, Caleb said. I ain't much of a cook. Eleanor always handled that. These days I mostly eat beans and whatever Miguel's wife sends over. Hope's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. I can cook, she said. My mother taught me, before she passed. Then we'll eat better than I have in years. He led the horses toward the barn. Hope followed, her boots crunching on the gravel path. At the barn door, she stopped and looked back at the house one more time. Mr. Brooks. He turned. Caleb, nobody calls me Mr. Brooks except the bank. Caleb. She tested the name. Thank you for everything. I don't know how to repay. No repayment, he said. That ain't what this is. Then what is it? Caleb thought about the question, about the broken wheel on the dusty road, the hammer left behind, the long night in the jail cell, the folded paper in his pocket with its single line of explanation. A second chance, he said. For both of us. Hope stood in the doorway of the barn, the afternoon sun warm on her back, her father's hammer still clutched in her hand. The wild roses swayed in the breeze. Somewhere behind the house, a rooster crowed. She didn't know what tomorrow would look like. She didn't know if she could trust this place, this man, this life that had been offered to her without conditions. But for the first time in 8 years, she let herself imagine it might be possible. And sometimes, possible was enough to start. There is something quiet that stays with us after a story like this one. Not a lesson we need to name. Not a meaning we need to find, just something tender that settles in the chest and asks for nothing in return. Many of us have known what it feels like to be unseen, to carry something heavy for years and wonder if anyone notices, to stop and help a stranger on a long road, expecting nothing, hoping for nothing, and then to be surprised when kindness finds its way back to us in ways we never imagined. Some of us have been hope, standing at the edge of something new, afraid to believe it might be real. Some of us have been Caleb, learning late in life that the things we give away are never truly lost. It is all right if this story leaves you with feelings that have no easy name. It is okay if some part of it stays unfinished in your heart, because the truest things often do. Not every silence needs to be filled. Not every question needs an answer. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.